Welcome back, friends. We are here with another episode on couples and sex therapy. My name is Zara Somani. I am an LMFT associate working at Relevant Connections. I'm super excited to have this conversation today because I love talking about all things relationship, sex, especially when it comes to understanding different cultural aspects. I love to talk about the South Asian intersection of this. I know sometimes this can be an awkward topic for our community, so I'm here to blow the lid off of that. And I'm joined by Dr. Kendall. Go ahead.
I am Dr. Kendall. I am the owner of Relevant Connections. I am also a licensed marriage and family therapist and supervisor. I also am on the faculty of National University, which used to be North Central, so I always get that messed up, where I teach courses on couples therapy, addiction, and sex therapy.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction. I think we are ready to jump in. I have been teasing this episode with some of my friends and family, and they're really excited to learn about the behind the scenes with some of the things that we think about and our understanding of couples and sex therapy. So let's get started. What is sex therapy, Dr. Kendall?
Sex therapy is really just a branch of couples therapy, but I don't want to get that confused because it can also be an individual thing. But really, this is just a deep dive into sexual issues, which are often related to other mental health issues or relationship issues. And so, sex therapy is sometimes very like physical based, and we're going to talk about the models that we use, but sometimes it's about our relationships that are just not working, and sometimes it's about our mental health. And so really it's just a very specifically focused sort of branch of therapy.
Okay. And what is, so it's a branch within couples therapy, or it can be for individuals related to sex and sexual issues. What is not sex therapy?
So sex therapy, and I get this all the time, is not going to be like sex coaching, like where I'm not going to come into your bedroom and teach you how to have a better orgasm. I'm not a sexual surrogate. I'm not going to touch you in any way. This is really just going to be talking about the way we're thinking or the way we're feeling, or maybe the ways our past traumas have impacted us, or the ways our communications are blocking us when it comes to having good intimacy. But it is certainly not something where we will ever be touching or utilizing any kind of like toys or objects in session.
Okay. So sex therapy is not teaching you how to have sex physically, but talking about maybe some of the myths, misconceptions, barriers if you're experiencing sexual intimacy issues with your partner or with yourself. Um, and so we're kind of focusing on talk therapy, but specifically with the focus of sex as the main topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that in the past, sex therapy has been, so it's come quite a long way, right? Like I know that when I was studying this, previous models of sex therapy or approaches to sex therapy were very much, let's deal with core relationship issues. And if we're on the same page with our relationship, then that's going to translate to the bedroom and we're going to be fine in the bedroom. Or often there's this misconception that if you have a really good sex life or if you have really good intimacy, then the rest of your problems don't exist. And that's like a good barometer of what your relationship is like. But it sounds like, in more recent times, our understanding is actually they're two separate branches that deserve equal attention and space. And that if they're both working together well, that's great. But that one, just because one's working together well, doesn't mean that one's working, doesn't mean we can take for granted that the second one is working.
Right. I have couples that have great emotional connection, but then there's some kind of blockage to like that physical intimacy or that physical connection. And I have some couples that have amazing sex, but they fight like cats and dogs, and their emotional connection is horrible, but they have great sex, right? And so it one does not necessarily bring the other, that's for sure.
Yeah. Something else that I was, made aware of, which I think this can go for a lot of different problems, but when sex is good, when our relationship, our sexual relationship with our partner is good, it takes up about 15 to 20% of the relationship space, right? The mental and physical space of the relationship. When it's not going well, that space turns into something like 80 to 85%. It
Right.
becomes really taxing when there are struggles with communicating about sex and sexuality, about what we want with our partners. One of my previous professors did an extensive study on uh, relationship satisfaction, and his study determined that the number one predictor of relationship satisfaction was sexual communication. Are we talking about having sex in the bedroom? What we like, what we don't like, what's in between us, all of the things related to our activities.
Right. I could not agree with that more. I see it in my office. I sometimes I actually laugh to myself because I'll have a couple that comes in one week and it's just tense and there's just a lot of ick in the room, right? And the next week they might come in smiling and laughing and chatting, and I'm like, "What's different? What's changed?" And of course, they've had sex and they're in a good place and they're feeling good. But actually, that is my favorite place to work because we can really talk about the hard stuff or dig deep in the moments where we're good. And so I think sex can be a huge protective factor for relationships.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about the approaches. I want to bring light to the biopsychosocial approach to sex therapy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So really, that is just a part of, we talked about in one of our previous videos that we're systemic therapists, so that we don't just look at one sort of factor in any of these issues, that we're going to look at multi-layered. So when we're talking about the biopsychosocial, we're going to look at if somebody comes in to me and says, like, I'm having difficulty with orgasm, I'm going to talk about, like, well, how is your body doing, right? Are we eating and sleeping well? Are there hormonal imbalances? Do we need to refer to a physician? And then we're going to look at the psychological. How is your mental health? Are you having a lot of anxiety? Have you been depressed? Is there trauma that's blocking this? And then looking at the social, like, how are you stressed? Do you feel like you have community? Are you well taken care of? What, and then to add on to that is, like, what are the messages around sex or orgasm or enjoying sex that maybe kind of blocking us in this space? And so we want to take all of this information and kind of integrate it into a whole treatment plan for the client.
Oh, I love that. And I think it's really important. Sometimes especially as we age, I think it's so important to use the biopsychosocial model because a lot of times the medications that we're on to treat other things can
Oh,
be
yes.
a first line of inquiry in terms of why are things not performing well, right? So, you've got like anti-anxiety, antidepressants, right? That will make a difference. Beta blockers will also make a difference, right?
Right. Right. And those are some of the big, like, I'm definitely going to, in my paperwork, I ask right up front, like, what medications are you on? Because that is one of the first considerations that I'm going to make when thinking about your case and how to best treat it.
Yeah. I think the ideas around the psycho and the social are also so important. So how does trauma impact this? The social part for me is really interesting because we think about the cultural aspects of this. And what does that mean in terms of the messages that we've been getting since childhood from our families, but also from society, from
Right.
religion,
Right.
um, from our particular culture that we're raised in or that we're exposed to. Even the parts of the country that you live in can make a difference in terms of how you approach sex and sexuality, right? So if you've got, and then this becomes, more robust when we're talking about couples who have different backgrounds, right? So whether it's interfaith, interracial, different parts of the country that you come from and you meet, different education levels, exposure, all of these things can inform the social aspects of how we see sex.
For sure. Yeah.
Um, what are some of tell us about a case that you want to share with the audience that would be enlightening for them of sort of how an issue kind of comes in and what your approach might be to address it and what it looks like at the end.
Mhm. Let me think about, I've had recently, well, I'm debating now. I have two cases that I really love. I have a lot of couples who have hit kind of that midlife, like maybe we've got kids who are older or like teens, and we've been in the thick of it, and we've really thrown all of our time and energy into raising our kids, and maybe our relationship has suffered. So couples will come to me lacking, they're like, we have a horrible sex life, or we have no sex life. And so it's how can we kind of build that back up? And so I'm debating that one. Or lately I have had a, not lately, but one of my passions, or one of the cases that I really like working with, is women in middle age, who have struggled with low libido, and this can be a result of in our community, I work with a lot of women who have left the Mormon church, and so there's a lot of if we're talking about that biopsychosocial, that social aspect that has created a lot of shame that we work through to kind of create recreate a really it's neurological pathways from like a negative view of sex to a positive. And so it's kind of different depending on whether I'm with an individual or when I'm with a couple. But let's go with the couple just for the
Let's
fun
go
of
with a
it.
couple and let's explore the religious shame aspect in our next episode of What is Sex?
That sounds fantastic. And actually, I work with a lot of couples who will come in together with whether there's religious shame or cultural shame. But this begins with first, we're going to go with that biological, checkup. Like, how is everyone's health? Are there any barriers? Especially in midlife, stress has been so pertinent for a long time, and stress impacts libido. And so I'm going to be talking or looking for things such as like anxiety or depression, because when we've been straining our body under stress for so long, depression can be a silent libido killer, right? And so
Can
we're
we
going to
pause on
start.
this for just a second? I want to explore this idea a little bit more about stress and sex and depression, and the relationship between these, because often stress heightens when we're not having sex, or sex can be a really good tension release. But it sounds like the opposite is working here. Can you talk a little bit more about the influence of stress and depression on sex?
So I think if we're, I mean, for sure that this is a biological response, right? Is that our bodies are just not created to have that spontaneous desire when we are under stress. Because if you think about its basic goal of reproduction, right? We don't want to reproduce if we're in under a time of stress. But in couple relationships, because so many of us are not taught to lean in when we're stressed, we're taught that, hey, your emotions are a burden, or hey, like my partner's not going to be there, or I don't matter. There are all these internalized beliefs that that creep up in relationships, and over the years, and I think a lot of men are surprised to hear that like depression can impact their libido just as much as a female, right? And so if we have two people who have been disconnected, who have been, there's a lot of like work stress, right, that builds up. And it's like, okay, I have a really busy day where I'm under all this pressure and I come home and now I'm caretaking and my partner's caretaking and we're both in kind of the trenches. And then we get to the end of the evening and we're just disconnected, right? We're disconnected from not only my partner, but from myself. And if I'm staying in a state of constant disconnection from myself, that can lead to a place of just we call it like apathy, right? Or anhedonia, where I just like I run out of joy for life. Like I have no more excitement. And so if we think about doing this for years as we're raising kids and building our careers, it's just, you know, wash, rinse and repeat or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And so we do this for 5, 10, 15 years. And so you wake up one day and it's like I've just been kind of going through the motions and now I'm disconnected from myself. My partner's disconnected from their self. We're both just trying to use numbing things, whether it's our phone at the end of the day or binging Netflix or using alcohol or marijuana or whatever it is, right? And so, of course, we're not connected because we've never been taught, like, oh, when I'm really stressed and I'm struggling, I can turn to my partner and say, like, hey, I'm really struggling and I need you right now. And that's a game changer, but that is far easier said than done. I It takes a lot of risk and vulnerability to learn how to have these conversations.
Yeah, I especially think about a lot of the women I work with who are full-time raising their kids,
Right.
and the type of just sensory overload and the very much the disconnection that they have with themselves when they're fully in caregiving mode for somebody else who
Mhm.
needs them, and what
Right.
it looks like, and the challenges that come with putting aside all of your needs to care for somebody else, and then meeting a partner who maybe, you assume doesn't feel the same way when they get to what you feel, right? Like as they get to fulfill themselves in some other kind of way. And so there's also a disconnect on that level too.
Well, then you make me think about also where we have couples with mismatched desire, where one partner maybe uses sex as like stress relief, but one partner is completely turned off when they are under stress. And that can create a whole nother layer of like what we call the pursue withdraw, where one partner is pursuing and now the other one is just avoiding. And years of this, we can see like touch aversion. I've even had people come to me and say, like, I think I'm asexual. And so we begin to explore, and it's like, no, really, you've just had this really deactivated sexual response cycle that we just have to work on kind of bringing back online.
Yeah, that's a great reminder of there's a lot of people, especially with these. I love that there are so many great terms that are out there that we're exploring. And often in that process, like for example, asexuality we end up sort of misdiagnosing ourselves, or not even diagnosing, but mislabeling ourselves sometimes because we don't feel the desire for sex, that we see that as asexual, but that's actually, it's actually
Should
an
have,
indication for a different issue that's underlying it. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of partners who will, like, for couples that have been in this cycle for so long, it is so frustrating, right? And both people are experiencing hurt and pain in the same moment. And so I've had a lot of partners who will bring in their husband or wife and accuse them of being, hey, I've been reading about asexuality and I think my partner's asexual. And they're like, no, I'm just like, I've just been going through a hard time
Yeah.
and I feel really disconnected from you. And so learning how to have those difficult conversations and kind of unpacking the years of resentment and the walls that have been built is a lot, but it's incredibly valuable and it's worth it. It creates long-term changes as opposed to just kind of band-aiding it, for a moment.
Yeah. Let's go back to that couple you were talking about.
I mean, we were really just talking about how we can get into, or the different ways that we can get into this disconnection, or how we can find ourselves years into a marriage and it not be us, we don't have the sex life that we want.
Mhm.
And so we start with, like I said, that biopsychosocial model. And so we're going to look at the biological stuff. Are we on an SSRI? Is there blood pressure medication being taken? Are we eating right? Are we healthy? Are there any medical concerns? If that box gets checked, then we're going to move to, okay, well, let's talk about the relationship dynamic. And that is very much kind of what we just talked about is we're going to figure out, like, what is this dynamic that's been going on in your relationship and what changes can we make to create a better relationship where we're not disconnecting from ourselves and using our phones or using technology or using work to avoid. We're going to learn how to turn to each other, which is really going to build that emotional intimacy. And through that, then it's going to open the door for physical intimacy. But then for me, it doesn't always happen organically. Like the physical intimacy doesn't just start
Correct.
right back. This is where I have activities that we do in session. I have homework that I will send with people. Um, if you've ever been in couples therapy with me, like you're probably laughing to yourself right now because I will give you a trigger warning and I'll say this is going to be awkward, but we're going to practice touching each other in a very PG way in session, right? But I'm going to ask you to hold her hand and I'm going to teach couples how to communicate. Okay, do you like the way that your partner is holding your hand right now? Would you like him to do it to squeeze harder? Would you like it to be lighter? Do you want to change the position? And in session, we're really learning how to improve that sexual communication, but using pretty benign sort of examples.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that's, when we're asking these questions about hand holding, I can easily see how the same type of questioning then gets translated to different activities that might be more scaling up and in terms of intimacy.
I encourage couples to take the same sort of activities that we do in session and we do at PG and here, but then we've already established check-in routines. And so I want them to integrate bringing in these games and activities in an R-rated version to their check-ins. And this doesn't mean that it's going to end in intercourse, but that we are just making time to learn how to touch each other, which is really important.
I think that's a really key point. Oftentimes I've seen, both men and women in couples who are have sort of where there's a mismatch of sexual desire, like one partner really wants it and the other one doesn't and is tapped out, that often these sort of escalating practices or homeworks are sometimes they get scarred because they're like, this feels like a means to an end, or that it's manipulative, or, oh, we're going to touch, but
Right,
then there's an expectation that it leads to sexual activity.
right.
And that can sort of be really triggering or set back the progress also.
So these are things that I am super aware of in session, and we will contract out to even say, like, if I have one partner who's become very touch averse because somewhere along the way, every touch between the couple was an initiation of sex, then I'm actually gonna temporarily take sex off the table so that we can just have room for the touching to be reintegrated with no strings attached, right? And then once the couple is able to find that rhythm, find that communication, and both partners are ready, then, it's like, okay, have fun. And this doesn't mean that, like, if something organically happened, that it would be against our rules for, to let it happen. But I do want to create space and safety for the partner who is struggling to feel safe in this, because I don't want to force anybody into going further than they are ready for.
Yeah. Let's end on this. What do you see as sort of what's the expectation? How long does this take, usually sex therapy specifically, or what's sort of the outcome that's expected or that's fair or that we look for to see that this has worked the way we wanted it to?
So every couple is different, right? Because these issues can be, sometimes couples are so deeply entrenched in this negative cycle and they're so reactive, there's so much resentment. It might take a little longer to build through. And sometimes couples, once, I had a couple today and it was our second session, and they're like, things are going great. We figured out once we talk to each other, we can kind of get through anything. And so really it depends, but the statistical averages are 4 to 6 sessions for things to feel better, right? We've got some movement, we feel growth together, and by 8 to 10, most couples report meeting their first goal. And now, again, a caveat that is, averages. And so we can have some couples who take much longer and some that are much quicker, but that is kind of what my expectation is.
Okay, good. I know at least for me as I hear this, like that sounds hopeful, right? Like we sometimes think about, like I said, like earlier, the statistics are when it's good, it's 15 to 20%. When it's not good, it's 80 to 85% of your relationship, which can feel massive. But to know that, not that it doesn't take massive amounts of change to be able to readjust this part of your life. It takes a little bit of faith and a little bit of, stretch to get comfortable in discomfortable topics, or uncomfortable topics, sorry, that cause
Mhm.
discomfort. But that it's within reach once we sit down and start talking about it.
Right, it's not a forever thing. This is not like a appointment that you're gonna have to have every week for the rest of your life. That is not my goal. I wanted to help you learn the skills and help you learn to communicate, and then I want to graduate you and send you off and know that you are living happily ever after.
Yeah.
So
I think that's important to say, yeah, get out of our office. Let's get somebody else in. We don't want you forever. Take the skills, run, go, and have a good life. Yeah, that's great.
come back if you need me, though.
Yeah.
I don't want to make it
Yeah,
sound
yeah,
like
that's
once you're
correct.
out, you can't come back. But sometimes we do need little refreshers, and that is okay too.
I think that's a total given. And that's something that I don't know if we talked about this last time, but in any kind of therapy, the goal is to, get you to
Mhm.
go off on your own with the tools that you have and to know that, something that was really profound for me was understanding that you're never going to be free of your triggers and of your trauma, whatever it is. We'll talk about trauma in another session, but any of the things that, make you tick, you're never going to get rid of them. You'll elevate in terms of your ability to approach them from a responsive way versus a reactionary way. But that, new life circumstances will challenge you. And that's when you come in for the tune-up. Thank you so much, Dr. Kendall. This was great. Next time we're going to be talking more about sex. We've got a few more things to cover, including why is it so hard to talk about sex and what actually is sex, where we learn about it.
Sounds fun.
So stay tuned.